Hello, welcome to South Park in Darlington. I'm Laura, I work for Groundwork North Eastern Cumbria, and today we're going to do a talk about the history of South Park. So South Park itself starts in 1636. A guy called James Belasses leaves money in his will along with 20 acres spread out over 4 fields to a trust. This trust was to take the money that was made from farming that land and put it back into the linen and wool industry in Darlington. Obviously, over the years the linen and wool industry dies down and they decide to just use it as a recreation ground. So 1840s they start thinking about using this place as an actual recreation park. At that point the only entrance into the park was Neesham Road, which is way down the east side of the place, onto an old farm track. So 1841 they decided to put another entrance in, and they put it in off Grange Road. Now if anybody knows Grange Road, there's a place called South Villa. Next to South Villa is a road called Penny Lane. That's the original entrance into the park from Grange Road. You would go down there and across a bridge and into the park down there. So 1840s they decided to change it to recreation. The final decision was in 1849. Yes, they were going to turn it into a public park. The main work started 1851-ish, ran through to 1853. So by 1853, majority of the paths were in. They originally were made out of blast furnace slag from the local ironworks. Probably the local ironworks gave it to them for free, or more than likely they sold it to them. The other things that were put in 1853 was the building behind me. This is Park Lodge. This was the original park keeper's cottage in South Park. Now everybody knows it nowadays as the clock tower, because there's a clock tower, but when it was originally built in 1853 there wasn't a clock tower at the top, it was a viewing platform. So you would go up to the second story and there was actually an open veranda with a roof over the top of it so you could view the park. The clock was actually added in 1901, so a good 50 years nearly later that was added onto the top. Also built at roughly the same time was a small tea shop, so they could sell teas and coffees. That was basically found to be too small, so in 1860 a slightly bigger one was built, and again that was found wanting as well. And then the cafe that exists at the moment was built in 1906, I think it was, or 1908. It's written on the front so you can see. That was when that was built. So the trees behind me are Sequoia dendron giganteum, or Wellingtonias is its other name. They come from California. These ones here were planted in 1863 to celebrate the wedding of the future King Edward VII and his wife. These are babies. These are 20 metres tall. The largest ones in the UK are up in Scotland, and they're 45 metres tall, so more than double the height. If you go to California, the trees over there are 90 metres tall. Like I said, babies. The other thing as well is they've dated some of the trees over in California. The oldest one they've found so far was about 3,500 years old. These are from 1863. Babies, true babies. So what happened was, after the Sequoia dendron trees, the Wellingtonias were put in, it was decided it was a good idea to mark special events by planting trees. So when Edward VII came to the throne, he had 2 oak trees planted between the cafe and the pink plinth thing that's the Fowler's Monument. Then when his son came to the throne in 1911, these 2 were planted. These ones were for George V for his coronation. And then when George VI came to the throne, there was 2 more planted on the far side of Fowler's Monument as well. You can see that these 2 trees are completely different sizes. They were planted on the same day And they don't know why the different sizes they just are. Just shows that trees can be different sizes. So this is Fowler's Monument, built in memorial of John Fowler, CE, civil engineer, who was actually born down in Wiltshire and married one of the Pease daughters, one of the Pease family's daughters, which is why he's memorialised up here. Now, Fowler invented a thing called a steam plough. Up until then, the area that you could plough was only an acre, which was an area that could be ploughed by a team of either two oxen or two horses in a day. Fowler invented a way of running two traction engines and a chain or a cable between them with a plough attached to them, and you could actually plough a larger area. For that he won the grand sum of £500 back in the 1880s, which was quite a lot. This one was put in 1881. Now, there's things missing off the top. On top of here originally was a plinth that was surrounded by, made out of bronze, which had sheaves of wheat on the corners, and on the top of it was a model of the actual plough itself. And it got pinched in 1979. Now they made a replica in the mid-1980s, and that got pinched before they could even put it up on there. So basically they've given up and it's just been an empty plinth since then. But nice piece of pink granite. So this is the Fothergill Fountain. Arrived in South Park in 1875, however originally it was built in 1860 and was put in Bondgate in the centre of Darlington. The problem that they found with it is this was a running fountain and they had no drainage, so it used to drain out of the bottom. And unfortunately at that point Bondgate wasn't a metalled surface, it didn't have stone on the surface, it was more like a muddy dirt track really. So a large amount of water added to mud made it a complete quagmire, which is why it got moved to South Park in 1875. Originally it arrived here, which is down by the main gates, on the main road. However, it got moved up to the Aviaries at one point, and then in 2005 in the renovations it got moved back to its original location within the park. So these are what everybody knows as the main gates. These are the gates into South Park from Parkside Road. Originally built in 1927 along with the road, well, Parkside Road as well. They were recreated for the 2005 renovation of the park thanks to the Heritage Lottery Fund. Now the problem was that these gates had disappeared during the Second World War. There was no photos of them, there was no designs of them, there was no drawings of them. They had a real problem figuring out how they were going to recreate them until a guy figured out that he had a photo from when he was a small child in front of the gates. That was the only photo they actually had, and they basically designed the full gate system from that one photo. So yeah, this is the original, well, what is now the main entrance into the park. So these are the Aviaries in South Park. The original Aviaries were put in 1896, and then it was renovated in 1937 and again in the mid-1990s. The original Aviaries were put in after two African black kites were donated to the town, along with several monkeys, although we don't know what type of monkeys. That's why the original ones were built. As you can see, the building in the middle is the 1930s building, and then the outside was renovated. It has been renovated since as well, and is currently maintained by the Friends of South Park. So these are the bowling greens at South Park. They opened in 1896, one of the early ones in the area. One thing I forgot to mention was this park opened in 1853. It is the oldest park in northern England. To give you an idea of the local ones, Albert Park in Middlesbrough opened in 1865, so after this, and Rockery Park in Stockton opened in 1893, 40 years after this place opened. The other thing is there's a flat space here And the reason there is a flat space is there used to be an observatory, like a celestial observatory with a telescope, opened in 1907. It was a donation of the telescope. The guy who owned it was moving away and couldn't afford to take it with him, had nowhere to put it, so he donated it to the town. So it was here from 1907. It finally closed in the 1930s due to people not really using it, and it got moved over to what was the grammar school, what is now QE, Queen Elizabeth College. Unfortunately it got burned down in the 1990s by vandals. So it survived for nearly 100 years. So yeah, the observatory used to be here. So here I am stood between the railway lines in South Park. Now there's a plaque down here that says that this section of railway track was presented to the council in 1952 from the estate of Colonel Robert Surtees of Redwood Hall. The stone sleepers are from the original Stockton-to-Darlington railway line in 1825. No, they're not. The original tracks in 1825, the railway sleepers were made out of all ship's timbers, because at that point they had no idea how successful railways were going to become, and they were trying to save as much money as possible. These stone bits are from the Stockton-to-Darlington railway line, however they're from the refit in 1830 where they widened it to 2 lanes instead of just a single track. More than likely these ones are actually from the extension that isn't even the Stockton-to-Darlington part of it, it's from the Darlington up into the mines section of it. So the blocks aren't original 1825. The rail lines on top of them are also not from 1825. The original 1825 railway, they tried to save money by having the actual tracks thinner as they go over the sleepers, so the sleepers took a bit of the weight, but they discovered it was just too expensive to make them, so then they decided to make them like an I-beam shape, so that when one side wore out they could turn it over and use the other side. Which also means if you look at the ends of these, they're upside down. The thickest part is actually up to the top, and the thinnest part is at the bottom. Now the thin part is the bit that's been worn by actual wear, and what's on the top isn't actually worn by wear. So they're actually upside down as well as not original. So this is the cannon in South Park. This is a cannon from the Crimean War, which was in the mid-1850s. It arrived in the 1860s under dubious circumstances. Basically, every council in the country could apply to the government to have a cannon for their town. Now, Darlington at that point, the council was run by Quakers who were pacifists, and they basically did turn up to the vote to send the letter to get a cannon. So when the cannon actually arrived in 1860, they hid it down by the boating lake, what is now the main pond. It was hidden down there for many, many years until it was actually brought up to the Aviaries in the 1920s. And it's been up here ever since. Apart from, if you look at the wheels are sunk into the ground. The reason they're sunk into the ground is there's actually a metal plate under there with concrete underneath it. Because in the 1960s, people would take this walkabout. They would actually come in and move it, and they found it all the way down by the main gates, all the way down by Nation Road as well. So it's actually fixed to the floor now, you can't move it. You can tell it's a Russian cannon because of this emblem here, which is a double-headed eagle, which is the imperial eagle of Russia. So that's how you know it's an actual Russian cannon and not just one of the British ones that they've flogged off. So where we're stood now is just by the play area and the tennis courts on the slope down. This is the boundary of the original park, original South Park, the 20 acres that were donated by James Belasses. Up until this point it's probably been known as Belasses Park or the Park. Or in the 1880s, a guy called William Thompson goes into bankruptcy and he owns this land down here. The people who have the park said that they're going to buy this. It's 24 acres, they buy it for £3,800. and decided to incorporate it into the park, and this becomes New Park and this becomes Old Park. The boundary line is roughly where these silver birch trees in the path are towards the river. The other part of the park was actually bought in 1919. Originally that contained what is now the allotments at the north side of the South Park, as well as a few of the roads as well. It was bought by the council, areas were taken for housing, parts were transferred to allotments, and then the rest of it was put into the great event field. So yes, the original South Park ends here. We'll go down now and have a look at what is effectively the new bit. So this is the bandstand at South Park. The building behind you that you can see is not the first bandstand. The first bandstand was put in 1882. It was on stilts and it had a canvas roof, a very vertical canvas roof. This one's a lot flatter. This one was put in 1893 and was entirely paid for by the monies that they took in the previous winter for ice skating on the lake. The lake had frozen over for 6 weeks solid, and they made enough money in that time selling tickets for ice skating that they could build this. It's also grade 2 listed, so it's quite an important building. It was renovated in the 2005 renovations. Originally it actually had a speaker system built into it, but they had to take it out because kids were playing death metal and stuff like that, and people didn't like it, so they took it out. So this is the Piedmont vase. It was originally built in the 1870s on a private house in Darlington itself. Then in the mid-1920s they demolished that house and started building houses across it, and they donated it here in 1925. The only original part of it is the concrete pillin up. The area around the outside is actually a recreation of what apparently is still in the ground underneath the houses where it originally was. They never even ripped it out, they just built over the top of it. So apparently if you lift floorboards up you can see the original basin underneath the floor. It was renovated in the 1990s up to a working state, and then renovated again in 2005 up to a working state. However, it's taken a lot of damage since then and is no longer functional, unfortunately. Right, so this is the Victorian Embankment. It was a section of the Skern that was actually straightened in the 1870s, and the embankment built as a flood defence to stop the park itself from flooding. Down the bottom end is the Victoria entrance off Victoria Road. Down there there's a couple of things. There's a big granite boulder. That's a memorial to a local doctor who was a keen geologist. And also down there from 1919 until 1940-ish was a First World War tank that was parked down there. Unfortunately it was broken up for scrap at the beginning of the Second World War. So yeah, straightened section of Victoria Embankment and the River Skern. So we've moved a bit further down Victoria Embankment now, and we're at the footbridge of the Skern. It goes over to the extra bit of South Park. Now that bridge there is the 5th bridge that has crossed the Skern here. I've had to keep my cheat sheet out so I can actually tell you the date. So originally, the original entrance from this side was in 1841. That came down from Grange Road, what is now Penny Lane, between South Villa and the Vets. That came in roughly where that waterfall outflow is there. In fact, if you go down Penny Lane you'll find a wooden gate and the road actually continues down, but it doesn't go anywhere. No one's quite sure who owns that piece of road, whether or not it's South Parks or whether or not it's the houses or whether or not it's just the council. So in 1841 there was a bridge across here. In 1887 there was a large flood on the Skern and the original bridge washed away and they replaced it. So they replaced it here in 1887. That one eventually was taken down and replaced at the location of the current bridge in 1939. When the land on that side was bought, they decided to put a new bridge in. That again was replaced in 1963, and then that again was replaced again in 2005. So that is the 5th footbridge to go across this section of the Skerne. So this is the Rose Garden in South Park. The land we stood on was bought by the council in 1933. The original land purchase included the area that the two buildings are based on now. They were actually sold by South Park for building. That's the only part of South Park that's ever been sold. Parts of it have been given away, like the event field, to be turned into housing and allotments, but that was council land before it was donated to South Park. That makes sense. The Rose Garden was put in 1952, renovated in 2005. The trees around this area, a lot of them were planted for the Festival of Britain in 1951, whereas the rest of the monarchs in the 20th century got trees planted for them. The Queen, when she was crowned in 1953, didn't, strangely, but we had just planted a whole load of trees over here for the Festival of Britain, and this had been done in 1952, so in 1953 I think they thought that there'd been enough trees planted. So this is the Rockery at South Park. Originally built in the 1930s. It has a stream that runs in the bottom of it that's fed by 3 springs. By the mid-1960s, no one can quite tell me when, they basically buried it. They stopped maintaining it, they clear cut everything that was growing on it and buried it under soil. And it remained that way until the late 1990s, when it was dug out again. Unfortunately, they discovered that when they'd buried it, they must have used something like bulldozers to bulldoze the soil over it. All the base is all cracked, so it actually leaks water now. So the water comes in, but it doesn't get all the way to the end. It's one of the things that South Park is looking to renovate, hopefully. So we are currently stood on Parkside Bridge. What you can see below us here is a weir. Now this weir was originally put in the 1880s to form a lake upstream. That lake was originally used as the first boating lake of South Park. So the area to the right where the current orchard is, it was actually flooded out, and that formed part of the lake. So the area was used not only for boating, it was used for swimming and water polo as well. Apparently the bottom of the river had just the right quality of gravel for water polo. They must have been brave, because that water is very cold even in the deepest, darkest of summer. And right now it's absolutely freezing. So we've actually come to the other side of Parkside Road now. This technically isn't part of South Park, however it was from the 1920s through to the 1970s. This was South Park boating lake, believe it or not. Further downriver there's a thing called the 7 Ripples, or the 5 Ripples, depending on who you speak to. That's the original mill site of Blackwell Mill. They raised that weir up and it flooded this entire area. It was 24 acres in size. So in the 1920s it was decided that they were going to put the lake here. They started digging it out and flooded it. Opening day, the mayor goes out on a motorboat in the middle of the lake and the engine breaks down and they have to row him back to shore. Kind of a foreshadow of how things go from then on in. Unfortunately, upstream on the Skerne at that point, the local collieries had discovered that all the coal dust that they had left over, if they dumped it in the Skerne, the river washed it away. And the river was fast flowing until it got to that weir down there when the river slowed down. And what happens when water slows down is it drops its sediment load. So very rapidly this lake started silting up. By the 1940s they were digging it out every other year. It was that thick with coal dust that people were taking it home, drying it in blocks and burning it on their fires, to give you an idea of how much coal dust was actually in it. So in the 1950s they decided to cut the losses. They demolished the weir partially, the place drains. They discovered that the mud is that thick that it's going to take 15 years to settle enough that you can actually walk on it. Unfortunately, within that time there was actually a death on here. A guy coming back from watching Darlington play at Feetham's tried to walk across. A kid noticed the footprints going out into the mud. A police officer followed them out and they found a hat, and when they lifted the hat there was a head underneath it, and he sank up above his nose and he drowned in the mud. So by the 1970s it had settled enough that they could do something with it, and they decided to put a pitch and putt on there. It only lasted about 15 years and then they kind of called it quits. There's been various different plans for this area, one of which was actually a car park at one point, but those plans haven't come to fruition as yet.